he is not in favor of the invasion, and he does not support the Russian government. He is against it, and he has said that on multiple occasions. This is all context I provided in the video that Gavin would know, and Zach would know, both of them would know, the Vanguard podcast would know if they watched the video. But everybody who critiques the video haven't watched the video. Okay, so apparently the Vanguard, which is a communist socialist podcast, all deep followers of Pol Pot thought, I don't know what type of, I think like Marxist of some vein, who reviewed my back and forth, well, not even back and forth, reviewed Hasan's response to me for releasing a video where Ukrainians critiqued him. And I was told by my journalist friend who watched it, and he sent it to me. That's the only reason I know about it. It didn't appear in my recommended. I don't bring in the views. It's just 2.3. I don't bring in the views here. My name doesn't. He said that in this, they say I don't say anything about Palestine, which I don't know if they really said that. We're going to watch that in a moment. But obviously that isn't true. In fact, I did check off screen for a moment. I think I might have uploaded more videos about the Palestine-Israel conflict since October 7th than they have. So I think I've actually been like covering it more than they have. Not to say that, you know, you have to cover it this amount or anything like that, but you know, I think I've put my piece out there. I think I've put my general 2 cents out there, saying pretty clearly that I don't believe that the United States should be sending artillery shells to the IDF. I don't believe that Netanyahu's government necessarily is that trustworthy to lead an occupation or lead an invasion of Gaza. I've given my 2 cents that if Israel wants some continued American support, there has to be concessions when it comes to the Israeli occupation. Generally speaking, I would say when it comes to the American political spectrum, I would be considered very pro-Palestine for American politics. No, I'm not saying push Israel into the sea. Maybe that's the problem, I guess. I don't know. But well, let's not put any words in anybody's mouth, and let's just watch.
Chad, has he responded to Dylan Burns' post, by the way, before getting clapped? If you think that I would entertain such a psychotic thing ever in my life, I don't know what to tell you. There is nothing more perverted and psychopathic than literally putting Ukrainian people in Ukraine that are being bombed, okay?
God, he just can't stop fucking whining. Anytime Hasan gets critiqued, he whines, man. He whines. He never takes it well.
By an
and I'm gonna whine now in response to people critiquing me.
Invading force that is unjustifiable.
But I don't even know, like perverted. Like he's just throwing stuff at the wall.
Occupying their country, making Ukrainians sit down and watch my clip.
Okay, I don't want to watch the preview. Can we just watch the video? How long is the preview?
The conflict that you are covering on the ground. It's nasty as
But anyway, I guess we could plow right into this and Hasan Piker, Dylan Burns discourse here. Like I said, we had a really reasonable chat with Dylan Burns.
Awesome.
He seems like he's really, really, really been stewing, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner propaganda for the Ukraine war effort. Like, I just feel like that's like his mission right now is like rah Ukraine, like Slava Ukraine to the max. And
I mean, I feel like I've been vaguely, when it comes to American commentators in Ukraine, more critical of the Ukrainian government than other commentators, I would say generally. Whether it's me talking about the Ukrainian government not properly protecting civilians when it comes to locking bunker doors and covering that in some of our reports on the ground in Kherson, whether it was me talking about the mismatched response in Kherson, whether it's me saying that I just blatantly just don't like Zelensky's economic policies. I think it's way too neoliberal. But I think most people, because the majority of my coverage is concentrated on, you know, the mass graves, the war crimes, stuff like that, don't hear that stuff.
Flemmy has donated $10. Reaction to reaction to reactions to reaction. Is this written by Frank Herbert?
Thank you for the $10. We're reacting to the reacting. I've criticized the Ukrainian government. I would highly reject the idea that I'm doing propaganda for them. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would reject that, but maybe he'll explain how.
I can like sympathize with the like knee-jerk support for like a people who have been occupied or you know, and like say, of course, like we got to rally with these people, like of course, like look.
It's just, if I go into a war zone, right, and I'm hearing reports and I'm seeing war crimes, right, I'm hearing reports of war crimes, I see firsthand war crimes. Obviously, my impression as I come back to the States where I talk to people is going to be like, hey guys, I saw a war crime. This is bad. You should not shell aid workers in Kherson. You should not shell and murder civilians in Mykolaiv. Both of things I was witness to and documented on my main channel. If we're talking about the kidnapping of children and then the forceful conscription of those children, I think these are all things to criticize. And I think these are all things to call out, especially as Russia is invading and occupying Ukraine. I'm in Ukraine covering the war, so I do talk about Ukraine a lot more than other topics because I'm passionate about this conflict. But again, I would reject the idea that it's propaganda to cover in depth Russian war crimes in the country. It'd be propaganda if I went out here and said, hey, the Russians use cluster bombs. The Ukrainians have never used cluster, but the Ukrainians have been using cluster bombs since like April of 2022. There have been reports of using cluster bombs. I've seen the Ukrainians also, through personal conversation, talk about using butterfly mines, which I'm a huge critic of. And I've always been open about this. I believe that I should be generally unfiltered in my coverage about the war and not edit things out because it might make Ukraine look bad, etc. You get the idea. So I would reject the premise that it's propaganda. And I would ask like what piece I've done that is propaganda.
Look at what's happening. I just think that sometimes the way that the foreign policy and the political realities manifest themselves, we start having a lot of disagreements. But I want to clarify that because I don't want to like harangue the guy too bad if we do end up disagreeing. I only like passively saw these clips on Twitter the first time we looked over them, but I think he genuinely comes from a really good place with.
Well, that's nice.
All of his like support for Ukraine in a way that like I feel like sometimes there are people who get like really rowdy about like a cause or something and it's like disingenuous. Like I would like some of the like the people who are out here like rapidly supporting Russia, like the Putin bots and the fucking like Jackson Hinkles and all of those people. Like I think that comes from like an absolute place of moral depravity. Like you have to be psychopathic and fucking bloodthirsty and just an absolute, vile individual, for sure. I disagree with a lot of Dylan Burns' analysis, but I don't have that same, like, I think that you could be a good person and get swept up in a lot of the, propaganda.
Man, I'd really like to hear which propaganda I got swept up in. It's all very vague, just vague propagandas, got swept up in propaganda. I was just a poor victim of the storm winds of history and the news reports.
When it comes to this, what do you think about that, Gavin?
I largely agree with you. I mean, Dylan seems like a nice guy. I'm not really in the interest of doing any like armchair psychology or pretending to know why he cares so deeply about this issue as some other people have theorized. I don't know. I don't care. He seems like a nice guy. More than happy to debate, discuss, whatever.
I mean, if people are interested, I've talked about it a few times. There's a bunch of reasons as to why I care about this. Number one, I have friends here. And so I care about my friends. I would like my friends not to die. And I'd like my friends to be able to live in a country that's peaceful and free, and they're able to, go back to their homes. I have friends who have been displaced from, Donetsk after the Russians took it over, and they fled for fear of both religious and political persecution. That's one reason that I'm very passionate about this. Another reason I'm passionate about this is when I came to Ukraine, I came here specifically to get a reading of the truth, to make sure that the news reports that I was seeing, which I did trust on the large, or I did largely trust to make sure they were accurate. And when I came here, what did I see on my first trip to Ukraine? I saw and did document war crimes. And so I got more passionate about it because I am very anti-war crimes. I also believe that the largest war in Europe since World War II is historically significant. I do believe that while, there are a lot of wars in the world, in Europe, this is the largest war since the Second World War. This is a war where over 1 million soldiers have been deployed by the Ukrainian government, or near 1 million soldiers. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. There is over, I think, 1/3 of Ukraine, according to the environmental health minister, is covered in mines. And due to my conversations with demining crews, which is also, demining is an issue which I'm passionate about, which is a big issue in Ukraine. They're going to be working on that for the next 80 to 100 years there's a bunch of reasons as to why I'm passionate about this conflict. But the last reason why I'm passionate about covering the war, and this is probably one of the most significant reasons that I've developed more as the war has gone on, is I do believe, and this was said by like I think it was said by the editor of the Washington Post in the 60s, that journalism is the first draft of history. And if you want to have a good first draft, you're going to have on the ground journalists recording the history as time goes on. If you look at the Second World War and how many war crimes were committed, we have a ton of evidence, but when you consider the scale of the war crimes, the scale of the genocide, the scale of the violence, we do not have enough photos and videos to reflect that scale. We have enough to prove that it happened, but not enough to reflect the enormity of the crimes that occurred. And so I think having more people on the ground documenting war crimes as they happen can be helpful. For example, when I was in Mykolaiv and I filmed the bombing of the city during the start of the Kherson counteroffensive, the sporadic bombing that ended up killing civilians, injuring civilians, as far as I know, that's the only footage that exists online outside of this one like security cam footage of a rocket missing a bridge of the city being bombed that day. Because I was at the right place at the right time. I didn't plan to be there during the Kherson counteroffensive. We were down there to deliver aid to like an animal shelter that was taking in animals that were left behind by their owners and stray animals that were no longer getting fed by the community because everybody had left. And while doing that trip, that's when we documented it. So I believe that journalism is the first draft of history, and you need to make that draft good. So to clear up any confusion as to why I do this, here are some reasons. Oh, I'm also the grandson of the CIA director, and I only serve America's interests. That's, of course, the last reason.
But definitely have some issues with his analysis of the Ukraine-Russia war, specifically his nonstop apologetics in defense of NATO. I think is pretty sickening.
Oh yeah,
I think that NATO, much like the police, sometimes they do good things, sometimes they actually defend people, sometimes even they say
nonstop, uncritical support of NATO. What is he referring to? I don't know what he's referring. I think because I want Ukraine to be part of NATO because it's the only organization that is proven to stop Russian invasions. I mean, that's what it was designed to do against the Soviet Union, and now it's what it's doing for nation states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which Vladimir Putin, in his speech, openly said, since they're post-Soviet states, they don't really have necessarily a right to exist unless Russia allows them to exist. But because they're part of NATO, even though those states would be much easier to invade than Ukraine, they haven't been invaded. This is the same reason why 1,500 troops are illegally stationed in Moldova, but those troops are not stationed in Romania. That's why the Russians were able to invade Georgia, but they were unable to invade any other nation state in Europe. So, I mean, that's where I see the usefulness of NATO. That's not to say NATO has never done anything bad. NATO has never engaged in operations that are horrible. That's not to say that, for example, NATO countries have not engaged in interventions or gone over their mandate, like what happened in Libya with the bombing campaign and with the weapon shipments going through Qatar. Even if that was not a NATO operation, it was led by NATO countries. Like I can critique NATO. My only belief about NATO is that its purpose is to be a defensive alliance, and in that purpose, something should serve that purpose. Something should serve that purpose in Europe, because obviously, from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we see that there's still a usefulness through defensive alliances in Europe. That's my only belief about NATO, really.
Save a life, but as an institution,
honestly, you could change. For me, unironically, if you were to switch up NATO and you were to do some reforms and you would make it not NATO, but maybe NATO 2.0 or FAFO, I don't know, whatever you would want to call it, I would not be against that. I would have to see the proposal, but I don't know. I don't know how he says it's sickening. I would like to hear him specifically reference what I said about NATO that's sickening. That's a strong statement.
It needs to be abolished. It needs to be done away with. And I don't think that it's really in the interest of the...
Okay, well, let's hear Gavin say what it should be replaced by. Does he think it should just be abolished and nothing replaces it, so Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania just get curb stomped? I mean, Finland and other nation states that are near Russia are now running to join NATO. Sweden is running to join NATO. So it seems that the Europeans who are part of NATO still believe there's some purpose to a defensive alliance structure. So through practicality, what should replace it? Because if you just say, for example, if you say abolish the prisons, then you say, okay, then what? And you're like, I don't know. Doesn't seem like a good plan, right? If you're against how the prison system is set up, for example, how private prisons work or how prison labor works, you say abolish prisons because of that, you still need a follow-up. Like, where do the prisoners go? Where do the criminals go?
Left to go around here acting like, oh, NATO's such a great, entity which must be preserved for the sake of national security and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, don't really sign off on that. And we're about to see a little bit of that in this video.
Also,
Are
a
we?
little context for such a great.
Am I? Or is it going to be the Ukrainians saying it? Like, I don't remember really chiming in much during this video.
Democracy worth fighting for. This is a guy we're rallying behind. Zelensky says it's not the right time for elections in Ukraine. I'm like, hey man, his country is getting occupied, but it's like that doesn't mean that you get away with not having elections. Like, how would we feel in this country if George Bush was like, guys, I just did Iraq, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the elections for the next like 5 or 6 years, just because you're gonna be really unhappy with the decisions I make. Like, what? Like, that's absolutely insane. That doesn't mean
That's not why those elections were canceled. In the Ukrainian constitution, it does not. I mean, I don't know how to get into this, but I'll just say this: in the Ukrainian constitution, at wartime, it leaves room for elections not to happen for national security reasons. This is nothing. This is not even comparable in any way to George Bush canceling elections, because America wasn't invaded; we were invading other countries. The targeting a voting booth, or the idea of not including those in occupied territories to be able to participate in elections, or building and expanding Ukraine's election infrastructure to include all of the displaced people, to try to include as many people who would not be able to use their original home addresses anymore. These are all problems that Ukraine faces. And not to mention the fact that there's also a problem of Russia has deliberately targeted civilians at times. And considering that it would be an election where people would, line up at voting booths, there is a fear that terrorism or some sort of targeting of civilians could end up hurting Ukrainian civilians. Now, you can acknowledge all of these facts, which led to Zelensky saying, you know what, we're just going to go with the Constitution. We're just not going to do it until the war is over, until the Russians have either left Ukraine or not. You can disagree with that. But the idea that this is like that this is undermining Ukraine's democracy, or this is like an anti-democratic principle by Zelensky, or like it's like oh my God. My point would be then, why did Ukraine host elections after the Russians invaded in 2014, even though technically Poroshenko, who won the election after Yanukovych was, ousted by the Euromaidan revolution, why did he have the election in 2019, period? The election where Zelensky won, which then ousted the oligarch Poroshenko. Because I feel like if I was fearful that this was going to be abused to like destroy the democratic system in Ukraine, why wouldn't they have done it in 2014 when the Russians first invaded? Why would they only do it in 2022? I feel like the reason they did it in 2022 is it's much larger scale, and elections during this time frame would come with more problems. Again, you can still disagree with it. But this is all context that people should provide when talking about it, because it makes it sound like, from the way he's talking about it, the Zelensky canceled the elections because the Ukrainian people are critical of Zelensky, and he doesn't want them to challenge him, like, because he compared it to Bush, like, oh, he's going to cancel elections because people don't want to challenge Bush on the Iraq war, and that's just not the case.
That you become like a stand for Putin, but maybe you're like, hey, let's question who we're giving all this military aid to, and like how this is being distributed, and if we're even interested in this for the right reasons, which we obviously are not.
I mean, I think we're interested into a combination of both right reasons and self-interested reasons, but also, even if we are self-interested, whether we're self-interested or not, that doesn't necessarily mean that it still isn't a good thing to send Ukraine weapons. If I'm working with somebody to send Ukraine weapons, and I want to send them weapons because I want Ukraine to win the war, I think it's good for global security, European security, and nuclear arms control, due to us upholding the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. But somebody else wants to give them weapons because they want to see how those weapons perform in combat. At the end of the day, if there's still good reasons to send those weapons over, I still think they should be sent over.
Okay.
Right. Plus, there was this pretty cringy tweet that I know we got into it a bit with Dylan on October 7th. He said, imagine if Hamas used their power to create a thriving
I don't think did he get into it with me? Oh, I think they did on Twitter, yeah.
Palestinian civil society, fight corruption, or benefit people to show the path to a successful Palestinian state. Instead, we get kidnappings and throats getting slit on film. Hamas achieves nothing but revenge fantasies. But again, nothing to say about the Ukrainian neo-Nazis or their authoritarian government, silencing dissent, censoring opposition.
What the fuck is he talking about? Like, did he even look? Did Gavin even look? By the way, let me just quickly say, Hamas did use their influence and power to commit a terror attack on October 7th targeting civilians, right? They could have instead not crushed down on the civil society. They could have instead of fomenting corruption, they could fight corruption. These are all things that they could have done that have been more beneficial to the Palestinian resistance against occupation than going into Israel and randomly shooting civilians. That's my point. Now, I will say that they are not the only reason the Palestinians are suffering. The blockade is obviously a reason that the Palestinians are suffering. The occupation are obviously a reason that the Palestinians are suffering. But the removal of Hamas from any responsibility when it comes to the problems that Palestinians face is, I don't agree with that. As for the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, I've been critical of the Ukrainian neo-Nazi. I don't like the Ukrainian neo-Nazi. In fact, I think I'm the only person, at least in our space, who's directly confronted the Ukrainian far right in person and been like, hey, the groups that you're a part of engage in anti-queer violence on this day. What do you have to say about that? When the war is over, will you engage in that afterwards? That was my right sector interview. I mean, whatever. But like when he says Ukrainian neo-Nazis, like, yeah, I condemn Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I'm critical of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I'm critical of all neo-Nazis in all countries. I don't know.
Destroying political parties that feel
Also,
differently.
When he say destroying political parties that feel differently, is he talking about, which party is he talking about? I just don't know what he's talking about. I think he's talking about the parties that were disbanded because of the high participation of their elected members with the occupation forces. I think that's what he's talking about, but I don't know, so I don't want to respond if I don't know.
also, it just the idea or the fucking myth, the propaganda that they're always spewing from the Israeli government.
Here's a question. Was it anti-democratic or bad for Lincoln to kick out all the representatives in states that had rebelled? That's a question. Was that anti-democratic? I mean, if we're going to go, for example, criticizing the election, was the UK no longer a democracy? I mean, all of these countries are flawed democracies, but was the UK no longer a democracy when they said for the entirety of World War II, or until this war is over, they're not going to host an election? Was that, you can even say that's anti-democratic, but you couldn't say like it's not a democracy, which I didn't hear either of them claim, but just throwing that out there. If any of our nations, France, Germany, the United States, Canada, if any of them were in the position Ukraine is in now, I think they would take a lot of the same decisions that Ukraine has taken.
To justify their atrocities is that, oh, they could be living lavish lives here in the West Bank and in Gaza, in Gaza, rather, Hamas doesn't control the West Bank, but you know what I mean? This is line where it's like, oh, if the Palestinians would just stop focusing on terrorism, if they just stopped throwing rocks at the IDF soldiers, if they just stopped doing terrorism and lived in peace, then they would have, a bustling society, which is absolutely not true. We've seen, it's just 100% ahistorical to suggest that for a moment. You can look at the maps. I know Dylan has seen the maps of the map of Israel encroaching, right? We've just saw.
Do these guys watch my content? I don't know if they watch my content or not.
The embassy move. We've seen people ousted from their neighborhoods in Jerusalem. Right.
I did say, I did tell Loner, if I was to rewrite this tweet, I would not say thriving. I would say that they could have created a Palestinian civil society. They could have fought corruption. By the way, I said thriving Palestinian civil society, right? I didn't even say thriving society generally. I said civil society, meaning that they have political debate, meaning that they have political discussion, political disagreement, meaning they allow elections, they allow a free press. These are all things that is 100% within Hamas's power to do. If they wanted to, they could create a thriving Palestinian civil society. They just don't want to, because if they were to do that, there's a good chance that they could lose power. So they won't.
Even now, also, Hamas has nothing to do with the Armenian Christian population. I just saw a video coming out of an Armenian Christian community in Jerusalem that was basically in a standoff with the IDF because the IDF was trying to move them out of there, and they were like, "Fuck you, dude." I think Brian Grimm actually tweeted it out, so I knew it was legit too. It was like they've been there for like fucking millennia, right? That's their. I mean, Jerusalem and it's in Palestine. It's been a holy land for so long, and just to point fingers at people.
The thing that get me about Ukrainian politics is the stuff that I'm critical about the Ukrainian government is perspectives that I've gotten from Ukrainians to be critical of the Ukrainian government. Like my critiques of the Ukrainian government is going to be how they hand out government contracts and the favoritism and the corruption that participates in that, how they're handling the rebuilding places in places like Bucha, which has exposed corruption, buildings that are given to like contracts that are given to shell companies that are owned by the friends of politicians and MPs, and then those shell companies that were just recently formed have no clue what they're doing. They damage the buildings worse, and then when the buildings are damaged worse because they have it get flooded by rain after caving in the roof, then they get to repair that for even more money. That's the type of stuff I'm critical of. That's the type of stuff I'm critical of, because this is stuff that I'm hearing from Ukrainian reporters. We're seeing reported in the Kiev Independent. I'm going to be critical of the command and the Foreign Legion, which to this day, I still get complaints from foreign legionnaires about their lives not being treated with the same amount of respect as Ukrainian lives. Even though it has gotten better and I have gotten better reports, I still get implications like that from certain foreign legionnaires. It's just my critiques of the Ukrainian government are not the same critiques that you often see in the media, because when I came here and I see the problems that Ukrainian society faces, they're just not as, I'm not going to say newsworthy, but not as like picture friendly, not as it's not as easy to be hyperbolic about. Like if I'm like, God, they handed out those government contracts to that shell company, it's like, oh, that's not as fun as Nazi, you know, that's not as fun, right?
People and try and kick them out. And the only reason to use Armenian Christians as the example is because there's absolutely no way to connect them to Hamas, and you can still see what the Israeli government's done. But Dylan,
wowza, Stardust raided with the 21 people. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Has changed his tune on that a little bit. I think he has realized that he was getting wrapped up in supporting stuff, and that's what pissed me off, because I thought that Dylan should know better. Like the reason that we were coming after.
I mean, I still double down on like 95% of that tweet. The only word I would take out is thriving, and if push comes to shove, I would even double down and say, yes, Hamas could create, if they wanted to, with the complete control they have of Gaza, they could have created a thriving Palestinian civil society. Yes, they could have created a civil society. That doesn't mean that everybody would have the cleanest of water. That doesn't mean everybody would have all of the other essentials that they need to have a good life. But that is something that is within their control. And that's why I brought it up, because it's something that would cost the lives of no one. No one would have to die to achieve that. What would have to happen, though, is Hamas would have to decentralize their power. And that is not something they want to do.
Him so hard that day was because I knew that exact propaganda line was going to be used when they tried to wipe the fucking Palestinians off the face of the earth. Literally all of North Gaza is going to be claimed for Israel now. I guarantee you by the end of this it's over,
well, let's write that down. Let's write that down by Zach. That's a commitment by Zach that when this whole war is over, North Gaza is going to be annexed. I'm not going to make any bold predictions like that, because I've seen enough streamers make bold predictions, then it blows up in their face. But I mean, hey, man, if he wants to make that bold prediction, I'll leave that to him. Just, okay. I will say, though, when you see what some Israeli think tanks have been saying, and when you see what certain advisory groups to the Israeli government has been saying, it should be concerning. It should be concerning and something you should keep an eye on.
Unless there's a mass global effort to prevent that from happening, which has not manifested at all. Like it's been moving to see the protest, but that's not the scale that will be required. It will be, and honestly, with how deranged and crazy Benjamin Netanyahu is and how fucking senile and asleep at the wheel Joe Biden is, I mean, I think that you're looking at like that is what happens, or we somehow end up getting up into World War III. But
World War III. We're very okay. Well, you know what? I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
World War III. Okay. I will say that Joe Biden's government did recently, and I think their statements on this war have been either entirely too milquetoast for my liking when it comes to putting forward critiques, or, if I'm being honest, basically no critiques of the Israeli government. There were some recent statements from John Kirby, who has largely been, I think, pretty bad on this war, where he was suggesting that the American government would not support a long-term reoccupation of the Gaza Strip. And if the United States government doesn't support it, that doesn't mean that Israel can't still attempt it, but it does indicate to me that it's anything but a foregone conclusion that Gaza is going to be annexed. But it's something that we should be concerned about. I just wouldn't make the bold prediction like it's going to happen. I just saw too many streamers make that mistake.
And I'm pretty sure, yeah, never mind. I actually don't want to say that because I'm not sure if it's true. But anyway, let's take a look at Dylan's recent video that he posted from Ukraine. Conversations online about the Russian invasion of Ukraine often don't include those directly impacted by the war. This is also true when it comes to alt media commentary spaces like streaming and Twitch's top political streamer, Hasan. So we got those perspectives on camera. So Hasan in Ukraine sat down with some Ukrainian people that have been
Hasan did that. I had no clue he did that. Oh my goodness.
affected by the war, and I guess subjected them to some out of context Hasan clips. Or
Out of context, Hasan. Wow. Okay, well, it's kind of poisoning the water a little bit there. Out of context, I subjected them. I beat them over the head with it. Out of context. I'd like to hear which clips are out of context.
Let's take a look at this.
It's like equal parts CNN focus group and hostage video.
Yeah.
Can I just quick? I think Zach's putting another joke there. Can I just quickly throw something out there? Ukrainians are not like all like mental cases. They're not all like mentally disabled and like need like care people to drag them around. And I like all like convince these people, all of which who are older than me. So like I've just like convinced them with like hypnosis or bribes, or they put a gun to their head and say, you're gonna sit down and listen to a streamer, right? Two of the people in question have talked about Hasan before. Anna, Ukrainian Anna, has talked about Hasan on other streams before, on Twitter before, and she actually was the first Ukrainian to bring up Hasan to me. She brought up Hasan to me. She was the first person in the country to bring up Hasan to me, before I ever mentioned Hasan to anyone. Thompson, another person who was in this panel, had already made a video about Hasan where he criticized Hasan. One of the people on this panel is a former Hasan fan. So that's three people, right, who have decent enough context of things that Hasan have said in the past. It's hard for me to think that like, oh, I've just like, I could like brainwash them with all this out of context clips. And like they all have a good enough context of who Hasan is, especially the fan, somebody who was a fan of Hasan, to talk about his content. Or talk about critiques that they have of his content. The only person who doesn't was Rick the Ukrainian. And that's because I didn't want everybody in the room to be people who were already familiar with Hasan. I wanted to, have at least, some diversity. That's why some of them are from Eastern Ukraine. Some of them are from Western Ukraine. Some of them are from Central Ukraine. Some of them were native Ukrainian speakers. Some of them were started out their lives as Russian speakers. I wanted to get some diversity and perspectives.
Oh God. Imagine just like going to like Palestine or something and then like showing some like, hey, check out this YouTube video of my enemy on YouTube, my arch nemesis, saying some stuff that I disagreed with.
Again, like these people have critiqued Hasan before, and it's not about like me disagreeing with Hasan. And like Hasan's not my arch nemesis anyway. Somebody that I hate more than Hasan is Jackson Hinkle, but I'm not sitting down Ukrainians and having them respond to Jackson Hinkle. And the reason why I thought it was not a terrible idea to have these people react to Hasan is, number one, I believe that Ukrainians should be included in conversations online. I believe that Ukrainians are often not included in conversations online about the war, and that leads to people saying ignorant things about the war. And that has led to Hasan saying ignorant things about the war, which is why many of the Ukrainians I brought on had already critiqued Hasan in the past. So maybe they subjected themselves to that torture before even they were waterboarding themselves before I strapped them to the table and waterboarded them myself too. Man.
Hey, can you condemn him?
And like if I was to like pick an arch nemesis, like I don't know, maybe Hinkle. I don't really have an arch nemesis. It was not about getting them to condemn him. If you watch my interview with them, I honestly in the video am the one who has to kind of stick up for Hasan in it. I don't know if these guys watched the interview. I don't know yet. They haven't given me any indication that they have watched the interview. I'll listen to say if they have. If they haven't, then this video is gonna. I don't know if it's going to be very short, but I'm going to very quickly disregard a lot of the things that they have to say if they're critiquing it and saying it's out of context, but haven't even watched the fucking video. If that's the case, then I've lost a little bit of respect for the Vanguard, but we don't know that. We don't know that. that's what Hasan did, but maybe that's not what they did. Maybe they did actually watch the video. Because then they can probably, finally, I'll get somebody. Because I've been looking through all the comments. I was looking at Hasan's audiences. I was looking at the emails that I got sent from Hasan fans. I was like, where is this out of context clip? I would love to see it. Is it this one? Where is the clip? I keep asking, and nobody can point it to me in the video. Because in the video, I provide all the context necessary, in my opinion. But one second, let's listen to their opinion.
Anyway,
can you condemn Hasan Piker?
Yeah.
Before we get started, I need to know, Gavin, do you condemn Twitch streamer Hasanabi? Well, I think that, what do you think? But
can I also just throw out there, I don't give a fuck if he's a Twitch streamer. Hasan has a fucking gigantic audience. He gets more viewership on his show than some actual news channels, depending on like when he's streaming, who he's streaming with, and what he's covering. He has a massive audience on both Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube, influencing people's politics about the war. He should be held to the same account, the same standards as other journalists are held to if he's going to be doing news coverage. He should be held to a high standard just like the rest of everybody else. Like if he's going and he's informing people about politics, or he thinks people should listen to him about politics, then he should hold himself to that standard. And if he doesn't hold himself to that standard, other people will hold him to that standard, or should hold him to that standard.
do you condemn Hasanabi?
Like on one hand, you want to talk about very serious issues like politics and war and death and destruction and war crimes. But on the other hand, you're just a little Twitch streamer. What can you do? What? I mean, at the end of the, you're gonna ask Ukraine to critique him? But he's a Twitch streamer. Twitch streamers are silly. They're silly billies. But if this was them reacting to Tucker Carlson, I don't think I'd get this reaction at all.
All right, so let's take a look at this.
NATO is 1000% an aggressor outside fucking force, okay? Russia is not. Russia annexing its own territory full of its own fucking people is not the same as NATO being like, we're going to turn your country into a fucking base and put literal fucking military bases and rockets into your country.
Saying that Russia is grabbing their territories is a total bullshit. They are grabbing the territories of what, Soviet Union, the empire that collapsed. People there identified themselves as Ukrainians, especially my generation.
Hasan here basically called me and Rick specifically literally Russians. He called us Russians just because we are from the Russified areas. That were
but that's Russian propaganda. Right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's where I'm going. The repeating of Russian narrative. They say those people are Russians. They speak Russian. That means they're Russian. They're part of the Russian world. This is the imperialism, colonialism that this guy supposedly hates.
So, I mean, a mixed bag there if you take it in that whatever context that was presented to you, right? Like, obviously, I don't think that Russia's like fucking annexing.
Flemmy gifted 3 Tier 1 subscriptions. The way they and Hasan both described your video, one might think you went to Mariupol and ambushed passerbys and held your phone into their face.
It's not like I was very open. Not only was I open, I was straight up like, hey, you know, not only was I open with them, I was like, hey, also, you know, with the way the internet works, there is a chance that, you know, maybe some of his fans could, you know, maybe get in your DMs and stuff like that. I just want to make you aware that, you know, that type of stuff sometimes does happen, especially in streamer spaces. And they were like, I made sure that everybody knew what they were participating in. These people have autonomy. Now, in news coverage, Ukrainians are often not given that much autonomy. And the way they talk about their country and the future of their country, it sounds often like, you know, European powers splitting up Africa, like, oh, let's give this part to the Russians and this part, well, I guess it could stay Ukraine, and like we're dictating to them what land is there, what land is Russia, as we do our strategic chess game in Europe, right? Where I wanted to give the Ukrainian perspective. And the Ukrainians were happy to give that perspective because they're often not included in the conversation. And the people who are complaining about me giving Ukrainians a platform on this are never Ukrainians. If you look into the comments of the video on my channel and you look for the Ukrainian comments, 99.9% of the time, it's something along the lines of either talking about what was talked about in the video, saying, hey, when a Ukrainian Anna said this, I agreed. But when she said this, I disagreed because I actually voted for Zelensky, unlike, because in the video, we also talk about things like, hey, did you vote for Zelensky? What do you think of Zelensky's policies? Would you vote for him again? Because we wanted to show that Ukrainian civil society exists and that there's disagreements and stuff like that. Oh, my goodness. But again, these people have autonomy. They can speak for themselves. They can choose to participate in interviews themselves. I didn't hold them hostage. They came and they chose to participate. Ukrainian nation is often not given autonomy, but can we at least give these individual Ukrainians some autonomy?
Their own land, like it's an illegal occupation and invasion, and it is a land grab, and it's unjust and it's illegal under international law. We've said that a million fucking times. We've always been clear and insistent, even in the face of all of the like stupid fucking idiots that have tried to act like this was always Russia's plan, blah blah blah. And I've never really seen Hasan Piker make a bunch of like, you know, gray zone style, like Putin is based, you know, kind of content, Jimmy Dore-esque. Like he's never really delved into that. And when he says that NATO should be abolished, he's 100% correct. I'm sorry that NATO's, you know, buoying them right now, but that doesn't change my position internationally. They've been.
What should it be replaced with? Should there just NATO's abolished and then Europe is just kind of like free for all? It's free for all dodgeball again. Like what's the plan? Is it just like naturally nothing's gonna happen when the power vacuum forms? I mean, I feel like if 21st century politics has shown anything, the power vacuums are not fun.
Absolute disaster. And I just, yeah, I mean, it'll all come down to the fact that it's like, yes, in that one, like,
did they watch the video? Like, this is going to be my main question. Because if they just watched this clip and then didn't watch the video, I have very little respect for any of their response, because I don't think they can determine if it was or was not out of context. And in fact, if they said it was out of context without watching the video, where we explicitly provide the context, I explicitly say that Hasan's not in favor of the invasion, that Hasan has been critical of the Russian government, and I provide context where context is needed. If they didn't watch the video and they declared that it was out of context, then they were making a statement that they couldn't have known. They were, quite frankly, talking out of their ass if they didn't watch it, if they didn't watch the full hour-and-a-half interview. And I would say, if you want to comment about the interview and say if it was out of context or not out of context, you can watch it. I know that I'm going to be a little facetious here. I know for Westerners, it can often be difficult to sit down and listen to Ukrainian voices, especially when you don't necessarily agree with them. But when determining the future of the country, I think it's necessary. I didn't even agree with all the things that they said in the video. I didn't even agree. Like when when Rick started talking about multipolarity, I didn't even agree with him on that. But you know, I was giving them a platform. I wasn't giving myself a platform.
I think the cop analogy that you were using a second ago applies really well, even in that context, where it's like, okay, if you have a family that's been held hostage in a basement, right, by Ted Bundy or, you know, fucking whoever, right, and then the cops come down there and they free them, and it's like a big deal, and then you tell those family like members like a day later that actually you want to abolish the police, they'd be like, are you fucking crazy? Those cops just saved my life. But that doesn't negate all of the truth of the system of policing being unjust. That doesn't.
Okay, but you still have to replace if you abolish the cops, you have to replace them with something. Like, is this a plan? Like, get rid of the cops, and then everybody's just gonna like flower children kumbaya, like sing in a big circle, play the tambourine, and take LSD and trip out? Like, no, there's still gonna be crime, there's still gonna be violence, there's still gonna be laws that are needed to be enforced. You would just create a different system. And so that's always my question for people who want to abolish NATO, is because I'm not against getting rid of NATO if there's something strong that can replace it, that can defend security in Europe and stability in Europe. I just haven't heard a good proposal yet.
Doesn't mean that we don't need to create an institution to keep people safe, right? If you get kidnapped, yes, we as a collective society should have the ability to go and get you and make you safe again, and we need to have that collective assurance so that people feel safe in their communities and all that kind of stuff. That's very important, but that doesn't mean that we have to continue to have the racist, unjust, barbaric police force that we have now. That would be my same argument that I would present to the people who are, you know, reliant on NATO right now, even though it's not. And honestly,
so what would you replace NATO with? That will always be my follow-up.
I would say the same thing about the United States military writ large. We cannot be the ones that are doing this, right? Should there be a global mechanism where almost like the UN, right? But a better version of it, a strengthened version of it. I'm not a fucking expert, but
the UN is very different from NATO. The UN will not serve the same purpose NATO does. the UN, even if strengthened, does not work as a defensive alliance unless the answer is anytime a country is invaded, well, we're going to reform the UN to make it so that those countries, you know, that they send like an army to defend it. But the problem is Russia has a seat on the Security Council. America has a seat on the Security Council. So if they, you know, veto something, so something that America does or Russia does or China does, anybody that's on the Security Council, if they veto it, then tough shit. And so if China invades somebody, tough shit if the UN wants to do a response, unless they want to vote on it in the General Assembly, which if they're going to do some sort of military intervention, it's going to have to cross the desk of the Security Council. They could veto it. If we were doing something fucked up and the UN wanted to stop us, we could veto it. That's what we've done for Israel on the Security Council for a while. If Russia wanted, same thing with Russia, Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I do not believe that as of right now, that the UN could serve the purpose that NATO does. And I don't know how it would, because they're two different institutions.
I think that that's what we should be working towards, right? This idea that we will globally handle these acts of injustice democratically and ideally diplomatically.
Well, the countries that join NATO, they have to vote on it to join. We don't hold a gun to their head and say, "You motherfucker, you're going to join NATO." So I think when it comes to democratically joining or choosing to join, it's certainly more democratic than CSTO, which is join or we'll invade you. Not saying it's completely democratic. Again, there's reforms that I would make to the system, but I just saying replace NATO with the UN is not like a serious proposal.
Second, you know, putting boots on the ground and taking care of something. If there's a direct human rights atrocity, ideally that would be what would be stepping in to intervene on behalf of the Palestinians right now. So that would be my explanation to that. But yeah, what would you say if you after all that footage had been shown to the Ukrainians, right? And you get a second to just like, let me just get in your ear really quick. Like, what are you saying back to those people to try and, you know, just like, I don't know, like, what's your response to that?
Oh, if you tell the Ukrainians, actually, not only should NATO not expand into Ukraine, NATO should be abolished, most probably will not take that well. Unless you could offer them an alternative, and the UN would not be that alternative, because I'll be frank with you, I've seen like maybe 2 UN cars in the entire country.
Basic B has donated $5. Gavin, CMB, and Zach need to take some medicine. It's really good. BTW.
What is that? Products? Volter and retard. Okay. We're not going to give them R-word tablets, okay? We're not going to give them R-word tablets. You completely threw me off. I don't even know what I was saying now. You threw me off with the R-word tablets. What was he saying?
Try and, you know.
Oh, yeah. If you talk, like, you would need to give the Ukrainians something that could actually guarantee their security. Because for Ukrainians, it's going to be like, these are a lot of lofty goals. But at the end of the day, we want what will ever stop us from being bombed by the Russians and will allow us to go back to our homes we've been displaced from. And unless you can give them some sort of concrete plan to do it, when they look at Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and every other European state to join NATO, and they know that they can't be invaded by Russia because of membership of NATO, you know, they're going to be a little, clingy to the idea of joining NATO. I don't know if clingy is the right word, but they're going to be pretty tied to the idea of joining NATO because they have seen it to be a successful model. So you need to offer them something that could be that type of successful model in replacement of NATO, but do it better.
Just like, I don't know. Like, what's your response to that?
To the actual people in the clip? Zach, you mean like the actual Ukrainian people?
The longer I watch this, the more I'm getting the impression that they did not watch the actual video, and therefore I don't even know why they're talking about this.
Yeah,
it's an hour and a half, okay? It's the length of a movie. And I can understand if, you know, me randomly asking somebody in the streaming space, you got to watch this hour and a half video, and they'll be like, no, it's an hour and a half. That's one thing. But when we're talking about listening to Ukrainians directly talking about the war, which we do very little of in the space generally, and we're talking about the video in question, I feel like this is the basic standard we should meet. Do they show the actual video? Do they show the context of what this clip was played? They said it was out of context. Do they show the context? They said it was out of context at the start. How is it out of context? Are they going to prove it's out of context? Or did they just take Hasan's word at it that it was out of context because Hasan also didn't watch the fucking video? That's the thing that's frustrating with me. I don't think the Vanguard is being like too scummy in how they're responding to this or something. It's just that, you know, I feel like if you're going to respond about a video, you should watch the video to get an idea as to why I did it. Because maybe if you watch the video and see in the video, I even stuck up for Hasan at times. You can see that I was generally interested in platforming these people to get their perspective, including in the conversation where they're often not included. They weren't included in the Leftovers podcast. And the things Hasan says about the war are terribly ignorant. Okay, I'm done playing fucking baby pillow fists with Hasan. Okay, he said that he was talking about right sector snipers killing Euromaidan protesters. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. The papers that assert that have not been peer reviewed, and the evidence is overwhelming that the Berkut, which they've matched the bullets to the Berkut rifles, were the ones that murdered protesters. We have footage of the Berkut beating protesters brutally. That's bullshit. So that's something we didn't even talk about in the video. I talked about it in the intro of the video. I didn't even include that. When he said that the attack of the Kerch Bridge, attacking the Kerch Bridge was a war crime, that's bullshit. There is no international law scholar that will tell you that targeting the logistical lines of your enemy is a war crime, even if they are used by civilians to also transport themselves, even if. And not to mention, the Ukrainians chose the middle of the night to attack the Kerch Bridge too. So when it had the least amount of traffic, it's not a war crime, but he called it a war crime, and then he never clarified it. He's talking out of his ass once again. He was trying to use it to both sides. Like, oh, they do war crimes. They do war crimes. You know, everybody's doing war crimes over here. I could keep going. In fact, I might keep going on principle. But you know, this video is 29 minutes. I don't want it to be my reaction to be like an hour and a half. So we're just gonna keep going. But I believe that when he says that in front of hundreds of thousands of people, before then having many of these quotes then repeated on YouTube to more people, right? If you include all the VOD watches, all the YouTube videos, all the live watches, all these people are getting influenced by this, and Ukrainians can't respond to critique that. What was it Hasan said in the GQ interview? What was it he said in the GQ? GQ Hasan. Where is it? No, not this one. Not Hasan Abi. Wasn't it GQ? Wasn't it GQ? Hasan Abi, I love critique. What, you guys know the quote though. I love critique. I love criticism. I thrive under critique and criticism. Unless it's, you know, Ukrainians critiquing me, then it's wrong that you gave them a platform. I can't believe it. It's psychotic. It's perverted. You're never gonna find it, but here it is.
Gotten numb to the criticism. As a matter of fact, I seek it out now.
So we gathered 4 people, including one former Hasan Abi. Okay, let's start this from the top. Start this from the top. Danabo edited this.
I've gotten numb to the criticism. As a matter of fact, I seek it out now.
So we gathered 4 people, including one former Hasan Abi fan, to talk about what Hasan has said about the war.
If you think I would entertain such a psychotic thing ever in my life, there is nothing more perverted and psychopathic.
I don't want to put words in their mouth. I don't know why this is included.
This community has raised $300,000 for Ukrainian refugees.
I think that's good, but it's not a shield for you to hide behind every time.
That's the best part. Is since Hasan didn't watch the video, he used the same defenses that he always uses when he's critiqued about his commentary around the war, which is, I raised money for Ukraine. I did this. I did that. I don't support the Russians. Every time he's critiqued, that's what he falls back upon. And so what did I do? I gave them his defenses because I wanted to make sure that his perspective was somewhat shown, at the very least, when it comes to his defenses to critiques. And we presented that. We presented him bringing that up on the Leftovers podcast. And this was their response to it. It's like, it seems like he's using it as a shield.
It's good, but it's not a shield for you to hide behind every time that you're being pushed on life.
Do you think that's how he was using it?
Yeah.
Well, I genuinely care about this. That's why I went out there, not because I'm like a fucking war tourist pervert.
Bro, do people think this is fun? Do people think that getting bombed is fun? That the feeling that chill from your spine all the way down to your feet? To start thinking about like, oh, if I die here, what will that do to my family? What will my grandmother think? What will this? Am I going to die? Am I going to die? Just sitting there wondering about it, trying to find things to distract yourself. I start maybe humming music to myself, anything to separate myself from the infinity that is death, which is ever present in a war zone. It's not fun. People think that they go, oh, Dylan's having a great time. There are certain things about this that I do enjoy. I enjoy making friends. I enjoy covering stories. When you're close to death, and this is very hard to explain to people, you feel closer to life in certain ways that you don't. I said once when I was talking to Vosh, and people really like dragged it in a weird way, where I said like the war in some ways has made me feel more alive. And some people said, oh, wow, he's a thrill seeking, da, da, da. Of course, there is adrenaline. I don't know if I consider myself an adrenaline junkie, but my main point has always been, even though there is of course adrenaline there and everybody gets a slight adrenaline high, and you have to be some sort of crazy in order to do this type of work. My main point is that when you're around death and you see death and you could be, death could welcome you into that endless infinity. You appreciate life more in a way that you don't before. The way I existed before and the way I lived before the war. So, I don't know. But war tourism, right? War tourism around.
Like the ones that like they just saw this clip and you're like, well, like,
I mean, I wouldn't show them a fucking clip of Hasan or some
they've
YouTuber.
already seen it. Like, how do you work back from there, right? Because like I'm thinking like Dylan's gonna, he live in his, world where that's a slam dunk,
Right.
Yeah, but it's like, what argument do you present as the alternative to that, to the NAFO bros? Like when they're like, you know what I mean?
The problem I have with it is that I just think he's kind of.
I like that he asked, what's the argument we say in comparison? And then it slides into Gavin not talking about an argument in comparison. Just, you can just counter their argument. Just watch the video. Just watch the video, and then you can watch it on stream. You can watch the hour-and-a-half video on stream if you want it. I know Aiko's done it. I know Lonerbox at least watched some of it on stream. You can do that, and you can counter what they had to say, or at least listen to their perspective. But before they've even watched the full video, it's like, how do we counter these Ukrainians in a debate? I thought I was a debate pervert.
Basic B has donated $5. Dylan War Tourist Pervert Man.
Pervert man. I am a pervert, man. But I'm not a pervert for war. I'm a pervert for femboys, okay? Very, very queer. Thank you for the 5. I appreciate it.
Misrepresenting Hasan's actual opinion on the subject matter and Hasan's actual perspective on Russia and Ukraine. I think that he's like doing this video in a very selectively.
Oh boy. Okay, let's see. Let's hear this. Here we go. Here's the actual critiques. Let's hear it.
Hasan's actual opinion. The problem I have with it is that I just think he's kind of misrepresenting Hasan's actual opinion on the subject matter and Hasan's actual perspective on Russia and Ukraine. I think that he's like doing this video in a very selectively edited way, at least from what I've seen, to paint Hasan as some sort of like Jackson Hinkle-esque tanky who loves.
He didn't watch the video. I now know he didn't watch the video. Now, okay, he was saying nice things about me at the start, but I don't have anything nice to say now to Gavin in response because he didn't even watch the fucking video, and he's saying I did it out of context. He watched an ad for the video where they hit on the points. I can give you, I say this in the video. This clip is from February 21st. This is after the annexation, the formal annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk. It is in reference to that and in reference to Crimea. He is talking about the eastern regions of the country, the Russians, the areas that have the most Russian-speaking populations. Then I play the clip. Then later, when they're talking about it and they're saying, oh, I mean, it sounds like Russian propaganda. I'm like, let me just be clarifying for everybody here. He is not in favor of the invasion, and he does not support the Russian government. He is against it, and he has said that on multiple occasions. This is all context I provided in the video that Gavin would know, and Zach would know, both of them would know, the VanCod podcast would know if they watched the fucking video. But everybody who critiques the video haven't watched the fucking video, and I don't have any respect for anybody who critiques the video without watching it. You watched an ad for a video. You watched an ad for the video. Watch the video and tell me if I didn't provide the context. What was I supposed to do for an ad? Do you think, like, if I'm trying to present an ad for a video where it's like, here's Ukrainians presenting to Hasan, do I have to, like after I play the Hasan clip where he's, like, talking about the annexation of territories, I'm like, let me just clarify. He's only talking about Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. Do I have to, like, put that in the ad? Because the Ukrainians were objecting to the annexation of any territory, period. That was their objection. And the idea that Russian-speaking regions, or the fact that they're Russian speakers, as two of the people that I was interviewing are, like, that's a justification for annexation. They were rejecting that. They were rejecting that as blood and soil arguments. Now, you can say that's an argument that's bad if you want to, but at the end of the day, I gave them the context. Don't say I chimp clipped him if you didn't even watch the video. At this point, By you only playing the ad and not the video in question and talking about what was actually in the video while saying that I didn't provide the context, you're clip chipping me. You played the ad. If I was going to do a movie review, if I was going to say, hey guys, Avatar, the new Avatar, The Last Airbender live action movie sucked. It was garbage. Here's all my opinions about it. And then all I watched was the trailer. I think it would be fair for the director of that movie to feel a little miffed. Just a little itty bitty miffed.
Putin and completely has defended the invasion of Ukraine. But let's take a quick.
Never said that. I never said that. I said explicitly that isn't the case in the video. If you would have watched the video, you would know that. Both him and Hasan haven't watched the video. Is it that hard to listen to Ukrainians talking about their own fucking country for an hour and a half? Sorry, but like this really gets under my skin. This part gets really under my skin. I don't think these guys are bad guys. I don't think they hate me or anything. But I do think that their critiques here are just not good. Like, especially if you're doing it from a place that has no knowledge of what the interview was.
Quick look at Hasan's response here, because he clarifies the way he actually feels about this. And I really understand why he is a bit frustrated having been misrepresented in this way.
He was not misrepresented in this way. God, is the next half of this video just going to be Gavin saying Dylan misrepresented him? Dylan didn't include the context. Dylan this, Dylan that. When he didn't even watch the video, so he doesn't even know? Come on, man. Come on.
So let's take a listen to this. And yeah, I
will say they are using a good source here for this video.
I think it's a example of like kind of.
Bamazrad has donated $5. On the topic of the Avatar live action trailer, it came out. I already
watched it on stream. It looks much better than the first live action with M. Night Shyamalan, which was absolutely garbage, absolutely terrible, and it kind of made me scared for this new live action, but it does look better. It's being done by Netflix. The casting choices are better, in my opinion, than the casting choices for the original Avatar. The bending, even though it showed very little of the actual bending, the bending that I did see looked snappy, it looked good, it looked powerful, and it didn't look like 7 people doing like a K-pop dance to move like one boulder, which was the original one, which was so bad, so awful. You know how devastating that was? 9-year-old, 10-year-old Dylan Burns goes to a Redbox to rent Avatar, the new movie, so excited to watch it, puts it into Movie Player to watch with his dad, and it's that garbage that comes on screen. Super disappointed.
Let's take a listen to this. And yeah, I just think it's a example of like kind of finding the wrong target. I don't agree with everything Hasan says. I don't even agree with everything he said about Russia and Ukraine. But I just think it's ridiculous to act like he's the problem and that he
is the problem.
Represents the worst of the worst as far as commentary goes on.
He doesn't represent the worst of the worst. Like Jackson Hinkle, obviously, and people like that are much worse than Hasan. But the difference is that Hasan has the largest audience politically on Twitch, which is the platform that I stream. And he streams to tons and tons of people. And I think is probably going to have more influence in the long run than Jackson Hinkle, considering that the main reason that Jackson Hinkle has a gigantic platform right now is he's been able to find a way to game the algorithm by reposting old footage from Syria, pretending it's from Gaza, doing everything he can to get on top on Twitter, right? Where Hasan I think has more staying power and has a very large audience. And again, broadcasts to more people than some news channels. And if he's broadcasting to some people more than news channels, and he's saying things like right sector snipers killed Euromaidan protesters, the Ukrainians attacking the Kerch Bridge is a war crime. If he's saying these types of things, he should expect responses. He should expect critique. It's not like his words don't reach people in Ukraine. He had fans in Ukraine, one of which, a former fan I interviewed.
This conflict, I actually think Hasan's commentary on this conflict has been pretty solid.
I think it's been garbage. I think from start to finish, it's been garbage. From him saying there's no way they're going to invade and him mocking the idea of invasion. From the start to finish, I think it's been garbage. I think him not supporting the invasion is good. I think him not being in favor of the Russian government is good. But like at a certain point, like to me, that's like the bare minimum. Like, oh, you don't support the brutal invasion where all the bodies are being dumped in mass graves. Okay, good. That's good. But what do we do about it? And I think it's the what we do about it where Hasan fails. And when it comes to the specifics of the war and the history of the war, where Hasan fails.
And pretty aligned with the way I feel about it, to be completely frank, despite the fact that, yeah, obviously, if you're streaming for years and years, you're going to end up saying things that
Basic B has donated $5. I believe Gavin's of name is at CMB Trap. Go check it out. Loads of good takes there. Smiley face.
Believe Gavin's OnlyFans name? I didn't know Gavin. I don't know if Gavin has an OnlyFans, and I don't really care if he does. I doubt he has an OnlyFans. Thank you for the $5 though.
Obviously, if you're streaming for years and years, you're going to end up saying things that I disagree with on the margins. But for the most part, if you look at the totality of his commentary, I think it's pretty spot on. I think it's pretty on point. Some of the best in the left streaming world.
Damn. God. Okay, now he's just riding. Now he's just sucking the cock off of his, not sucking the cock, sucking the hairs off of his cock. He's just riding now. This is just riding. If the best, he had the best commentary about the war in the streaming world. He acknowledged that if he was wrong about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it would be a Tim Pool 49 state landslide moment. He acknowledged that into the run up while saying the dumb things he was saying about right sector snipers and otherwise, and endorsing the annexation of Crimea as a justifiable act. Saying it might have not been done in the right way, but it was right, you know, it was justifiable. Like, really, that's the best commentary we can get on Twitch. If that is the best commentary we can get on Twitch, this platform is doomed for political commentary.
So for that reason, I do think it's pretty weaselly to take a few clips out of context that make it look like Hasan.
Weaselly, God, okay. I am slowly, like with every word, I'm losing more and more and more respect. It's weaselly to not watch the video before you commentate on the video, saying I took clips out of context. How is this like the thing that I have to go back and forth with people on? Hey, if you want to critique my video, watch the fucking video. I had to go watch the original context for all these Hasan clips to include them. I had to go watch all these Hasan videos to make sure that I wasn't taking them out of context. I put in the effort to do it, but nobody wanted to look at that effort in the actual video. They want to say the ad is the video. The ad is the only context we need to talk about the video. God, man. Come on. Weasley? Come on. You don't know what you're talking about.
Is praising.
He quite literally doesn't know what he's talking about because he didn't watch it.
The Russian military effort. When that's out.
I never said that. We never say that in the video. We don't praise the Russian military effort, but he does say that it was justifiable for them to annex territory from Ukraine, which the Ukrainians, big surprise, were not too happy about, especially the one that was displaced from the areas that they annexed. Yeah, I think somebody that was turned into a refugee by the Russians annexing territory might feel a little uncomfortable about somebody saying that, oh, well, you know, Eastern Ukrainian regions, they all, you know, speak Russian and, you know, justifiable act to annex Crimea. Yeah, they might feel a little uncomfortable about that. I included the context in the video. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. Come on.
Obviously not.
Like, I'm willing to talk to them about this if they really want to, but if they want to talk to me about this, they have to watch the video. That would be like the bare minimum I would ask for somebody. If they wanted to talk to me about a video I did, they would have to watch the video. You know what this feels like? I sometimes I'll watch interviews with like celebrities and not what are the, like Entertainment Tonight. I don't really watch Entertainment Tonight much, but sometimes when I'm back in the States, like a family member will have it on the TV when I'm visiting. And I'll see these interviews, and most of the time it's fine, but once in a while I'll notice like certain questions will be asked. I know Norm Macdonald used to joke about this, like, where did you get your ideas from? Where'd you get your start? Right? And you listen to more of the questions, and you're like, none of these are about the movie that he's being interviewed for. None of this has to do with the material. Did he watch the movie? Did he read the book that they're talking about? They're not talking about the book. They're talking about anything but the book. That's what it feels like right now. Scary Bird, thanks for the 100 bits.
Not the totality of his commentary here, but let's take a quick look at this.
Chat, has he responded to Dylan Burns' post, by the way, before getting clapped? If you think that I would entertain such a psychotic thing ever in my life, I don't know what to tell you. There is nothing more perverted
than listening to Ukrainians
and psychopathic than literally putting Ukrainian people in Ukraine that are being fucking bombed, okay, by an invading force that is unjustifiably occupying their country, making Ukrainians sit down and fucking watch my...
I didn't make them do anything. This is the problem. Again, why are Ukrainians always robbed of the autonomy? I didn't make them sit down. They asked. If one of them actually asked if they could participate. But they participated openly, willingly, knowing what the interview was about, knowing what it was going to be. Two of the people already being critiques of Hasan, one of them being a former Hasan fan. They knew what they were signing up for. He just is uncomfortable that Ukrainians felt that they would like to add their commentary in critique of Hasan, that they would take an hour and a half to 2 hours of their time to sit down and critique Hasan for the things that he said. That makes him uncomfortable. And that's why he reacted in this way. And this is the thing that gets me. There were other videos released recently about Hasan on YouTube. They got more views than mine. He didn't react to those. He didn't even talk about those. Mine got the reaction. I think there's something about my video that particularly got under Hasan's skin. Something about colonized people who are victims of imperialism, critiquing Hasan's commentary about the war, which has been very ignorant at times, made him uncomfortable. And instead of responding to their critiques, instead of responding to their criticisms, he instead questions the idea of listening to their criticisms in the first place.
Clips out of fucking context in a way that you have framed it to have them go, oh, wow, how fucked up, fuck this guy. It is literally the most...
That's not what I did. I didn't sit them down to just get them all to say, fuck you. I wanted to include them in the conversation that Hasan doesn't include them in. Because he doesn't. He doesn't talk to the people in Ukraine about what they want for the future of the country, what they think about aid being sent in. Where's the big show that he had where he did that? He's never done that. And since he's never done that, and he doesn't do that on his stream while I'm saying ignorant things about the war, I did it for him. Tough shit.
Most unimaginably insane thing I've ever...
Like, alt media is only going to get bigger, right? As mainstream media and cable news continues to tumble, alt media platforms like Twitch, like YouTube, and other platforms as well, with their news broadcasters are only going to get bigger. They're only going to get more influence. They're only going to get larger audiences. At what point is alt media large enough and have enough influence that stuff like this project is worthwhile and they're not just all dumb streamers, we don't need to listen to them, whatever. Like, oh, we just got them all to sit down and listen to a streamer. But if I got them all to sit down and listen to CNN's coverage of the war, oh, that's different. That's cable news. I wouldn't get any of this reaction in that situation.
Ever seen in my entire life. It completely betrays how much you care about the conflict that you are covering.
You know what? Next video, Ukrainians react to the Vanguard. Kidding.
On the ground. It's nasty as fuck. It's
nasty.
Such a weird psychopathic thing
to listen to these Ukrainians. I can't believe these Ukrainians would critique me. This is so psycho. I mean, I can't believe that the Dylan would platform Ukrainians critique me. This is psychopathic. Dude, his entire response was just gibberish whining.
To do, especially considering that I have time and time again, over and over again, repeated my position, okay, that it is completely unjustifiable to invade Ukraine.
Okay, so if there was an issue in America, let's say that I'm like, yes, I'm against cancer research. I mean, I'm against cancer. I think cancer's bad. But then I followed up by saying, but we shouldn't really invest in the cancer research. We shouldn't really do this. Shouldn't really do this. And I said a bunch of things that were things that people who care about this issue might critique. Whether or not you did the bare minimum of saying cancer is bad, right? That doesn't mean you can't have other critiques. Whether or not Hasan is against the invasion, that doesn't mean there isn't other things that might be critique worthy or that Ukrainians might want to call out and say, oh, you know what? I actually don't agree with what he said about the right sector snipers. I don't agree with what he said about this. I don't agree with what he said about Crimea. I think that the reason that he got his prediction so wrong was due to faulty logic. You can have the base position of, for example, like, I believe everybody should have healthcare, but if you follow that up by proposing bad healthcare solutions, you're going to get critiqued by people who care about healthcare.
Russia is cruel for doing such an act, and that Ukrainians, of course, have a just cause for emancipation. Not only that, but I've also raised money for Ukrainian refugees. This community is raised.
This is the thing. If you would have watched the video, in the video in question, they specifically say that he uses his money, his $300,000 that he raised for Ukrainian refugees, as a shield to deflect from criticism. And now that there's a video been released where Ukrainians are critiquing Hasan, what does he do? Before even watching the video where they said that he uses his money he fundraises to deflect from criticism, he then uses it again to deflect from criticism. That was how I knew for sure he didn't even watch the video.
It's $300,000 for Ukrainian refugees. It is so insane to do a Jubilee video on this. Okay, I can't. I don't know what to say. It basically. It basically
He doesn't know what to say because he doesn't have any responses to any of the critiques. He didn't watch the video, so he has nothing to say about the video because he didn't watch it. So he's just making up what the video was.
Portrays the position that you have, like, oh, I genuinely care about this. That's why I went out there, not because I'm like a fucking war tourist pervert, but I went out there because I care about these people. So what am I doing? I'm like fucking using this as an opportunity to be like, yeah, look at how bad this guy is. Like,
he didn't watch the video. Every single word he spouts out is just so clear. He doesn't even care enough to listen to them.
What the fuck?
See, that's what's fucked up about it, right? Is that I mean, one, Hasan raised a shit ton of money, and I get it. He's a massive Twitch streamer. It's easy.
Can I just be blunt? I no longer care. Like, it's good that he raised the money, but as defense for critiques about him, it's shit. What if let's say I said something really ignorant about queer people, and I was like, trans people. I mean, like, I guess that's kind of real, but it's kind of fake too. I said something stupid, something ignorant, just something not knowledgeable. And I went out there, I was like, trans people were created by the Germans during World War II. Just some dumb, ignorant nonsense, right? I can't fall back on the fact that I raised money for LGBT orgs or participated in LGBT activism as like, wait a second. Like, I can do that to prove that maybe I care about the issue or that I don't like hate queer people. But I can't use that as a defense against the fact that my statement was ignorant and didn't make sense. So I care that he raised money. I don't care about it as a defense against critique.
Easier for him to do that, but he could also be just getting richer. So, you know, you can't be mad at somebody that, I mean, you know, it is what it is. You could say that's marketing for him if you wanted to be a huge pessimist, but at least it's something that he ostensibly supports, right? Just put his money where his mouth is, and I think that his point that he makes right there kind of shores up everything that Dylan was trying to imply he didn't believe, right? Like that he's somehow like a Russian propagandist.
I never implied that. I explicitly said in the video he's not in favor of the invasion. So neither of them watched it. There's two of them. There's two of these guys. Both of these guys could have, either of them could have watched. Gavin could have watched it and then afterwards said, okay, so here's the points I want to go over. Whereas Zach could have watched. There's two of them. This is even worse because it's not one person who was like, I'm not going to bother to watch it. It's two people, both members of the podcast, who didn't bother to watch the video.
It's like, no.
Why am I even reacting to it? Why would I even give this like my time if they didn't even give it the time to do the proper research? Why? It's always going to be about the fact that I even had the conversation in the first place. Instead of talking about the things that were said, instead of talking about the critiques of Hasan, which were valid, it's now a debate about whether the conversation should even happen in the first place, of whether Ukrainians should have a platform to critique Hasan, or whether that's dumb because he's a streamer, or it's because he's my arch nemesis. When did Hasan become my arch nemesis? I was not familiar that I was in his mind that much. I was not familiar. He's the largest person on the platform. People are going to talk about him. He's the largest person on the platform talking politics. It's going to get critiqued. He said he wanted critique. I just gave him what he wanted.
And for all the people in our chat that are like throwing a tantrum, being like, you guys need to get the Ukrainian perspective. This is, you know, he might be getting Russian propaganda. Bro, like at the end of the day, I hate to be that guy, but there's a lot of fucking horrible shit that's going on in the world. There is so much horrible shit going
Dude, come on.
on in the world that I could literally bombard you with it all day long. And there is a lot of horrible shit that is happening in my backyard in fucking Kansas City.
Dude, if you take the time to record a 30-minute video talking about Hasan clapping back at Dylan Burns, right? If you can do this, then you could have taken the time to sit down and watch the interview that you're discussing and listen to their perspectives. So the defense as to why they didn't need to listen to the Ukrainian perspectives is because there's a lot of bad things happening in the world. Like, look, if you wanted to say, look, I have no interest in listening to the Ukrainian perspective, you know what you could do? Not watch the video and not talk about the video, because you shouldn't talk about things you don't know anything about. But instead, he wants to have his cake and eats it too. He wants to both talk about the videos where we highlighted Ukrainian perspectives, but also not have to highlight Ukrainian perspectives.
City in fucking Midtown Kansas City, like literally concentrating right where I am. Like a bunch of bad shit is happening, right?
Like you can, like I can talk about these bad things and you can talk about your bad things. We can all talk about bad things. The world has tons of bad topics.
Yeah, you
I
don't have to
have
fly halfway across the world to find a community that's in need of help. You know what I'm saying? Like,
for sure. But the idea is that like
Okay, but they're still in need of help.
to act like we are all like somehow indebted and like have a responsibility.
If you know what, Gavin, that's fine. You go to the war zone. Zach can go to the war zone, and I can do the stuff in their community. Because if we want to document the war and make sure that Americans are not just getting mainstream media stuff, just only what the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, and their military embeds into how the war is covered, we're going to have to need freelance journalists to do that. So if Gavin wants to come over here, I know some good frontline embeds. I can send him over to Avdiivka. I can send him over to the Donetsk region. I know some good stuff in the south with the counteroffensive he can get embedded with. Zach, I think Zach would probably want to embed I think probably around Kupiansk. I think he'd be a good guy to be up there in Kupiansk.
To the Ukrainian people. Like I don't know if that's necessarily like true, right? Like, oh, we have to keep sending our military weapons over there. Like, oh, we have to keep like financing this. It's like, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to do that?
Maybe if you watch the video, then they could listen to why Ukrainians think it's a good idea to send them continued supplies. Maybe he would have an answer to that question. I have a few answers to that question. I believe when we say, hey, nation state, give up your nuclear arsenal and we'll respect your territorial integrity and we'll help you uphold it, that we should stick to that commitment. Because if we don't stick to that commitment, the message that is sent around the world is your borders are not safe until you have the power of the sun in your arsenal that could end the world. And I don't like nuclear arms races. I generally don't think it's a good idea. I think the more points of failure we have in a global nuclear system, in global nuclear stockpiles, the more likely something goes wrong and then a bunch of people die, or possibly even the world. I know I talk about, like, people talk about World War III and, you know, the whole world ending, and a lot of times it's very hyperbolic, but the more nation states that pick up nuclear arsenals, especially if they have territorial disputes with other nations, the more likely a nuclear incident occurs. And that's something that we should discourage, and we should discourage that by holding up our commitments when nation states do actually go through the process of denuclearizing. And Ukraine is one of the few states that did go through that process of denuclearizing. And what was their reward for it? Their nation being invaded and their people being dumped in mass graves. That's one reason. I could talk about European security. I could talk about Ukrainian sovereignty, or the fact that the Ukrainian people probably shouldn't be dumped in mass graves, and Russia showed itself to not be a good enough actor to control that territory well and look out for the interests of that people and not engage in a campaign of ethnic cleansing. Like, there's a lot of arguments, I think.
Why would I not be funding something like you know what I mean? Just this idea.
We sent $8 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. We spent $75 billion in Ukraine, and I've heard a lot more yapping about ending that money, which has been much more successful in achieving the goal set out than the $8 trillion we spent to then give Afghanistan back to the Taliban, and then in Iraq have the country divided by sectarian militias, much of which funded by Iran. And so I think we're getting a good bang for a buck here.
A curd is a curd.
Lucy_Hayes has donated $10. Quack says the duck it's true. Is Hasan okay with the illegal conscription of Crimea now? After all, it's Russian.
I have no clue. I mean, it would be illegal, and I do want to clarify this because this is happening in occupied territory. There's even one story, and I talked about it recently on the channel. But it is illegal to recruit people in occupied territory or forcefully conscript them. That is illegal under international law. But Russia has been doing that in Crimea and other parts of occupied territory. Not only have they been doing that, many of the teens and children that they kidnapped have been sent back to Russia. I think the current number, if I remember, is like 19.5 thousand. And some of those which are teenagers and are coming of age during the war are now being sent conscription notices and are being sent letters from conscription offices to come there to possibly to be sent to go fight their countrymen as they come of age. So they kidnap a teenager, bring them to Russia illegally. If you are to take children, you have to put them in a third-party country for this exact reason. They take them back to Russia. He tries to flee back to Ukraine. They stop him at the Belarusian border, bring him back, put him with the foster family that he doesn't want. And then once he turns 18, conscript him and throw him in the army and send him back to kill his countrymen. I don't think Hasan endorses that, but that is something that is happening in occupied territory. It's really horrific. And it's stories like that that make me care if you know, the podcast was interested in knowing why.
Where it's like, oh, you as an American, like, you don't know, like, it's what the Ukrainians need. And I'm like, well, bro, you want my fucking tax dollars to do that? Do you want my fucking government's money to do that when we got people fucking sleeping on the streets here? We got people dying in fucking droves because they don't have health insurance.
Let's just throw out here a quick proposal. And I think we can help both the homeless and Ukraine. I think that's possible. We're the wealthiest nation that has ever existed. I think that's, you know, within our means. But putting that aside, definitely says a lot of stuff. We sent over our old stockpiles that we can't even convert to homes if we wanted to. Putting that aside for a moment, it is his tax dollars. That is true. But let's say we stopped all aid to Ukraine tomorrow. Would we get health care? Would we get like our homeless population housed? Would the House vote in favor of that? Would the Senate vote in favor of that? Would the presidency advance that? We're in deadlock due to the Republican control of the House. Even when the Republican control of the House ends, if it ends anytime soon, inshallah, even if it does, many of the issues that we care about, even if it's Democrat-controlled House, Senate, and presidency, many of the stuff that we want them to do, they're not going to do, or they're going to not go as far enough as we would want. But if we were to end aid to Ukraine tomorrow, nothing would change. The only thing that would change is the Russians have a better chance at taking more cities and filling more mass graves.
Insurance, like, we got a lot of fucking problems domestically, and let me tell you what, dude, one of the best things we could do as a fucking country for the world is to demilitarize ourselves and to stop putting fucking bases everywhere and stop fucking trying to control everything and have United States hegemony, right? Our de-escalation project. Now, I think in tangent with that, we should work with the rest of the world collectively, right? But this idea that I should be like stoked to have a new Cold War with Russia and fight it.
We're not, nobody's excited that we're fighting the Russians in Ukraine or we're helping the Ukrainians fight back the Russians. Nobody likes that the war happens, but that's not how war a lot of times rears its ugly head. You know, when we were attacked on Pearl Harbor, Americans didn't want it to happen, but it happened, and then we had to fight a war. You know, when the Civil War happened, Americans didn't want a civil war to happen, but when history reared its ugly head, we had to fight a war. You know, I remember once, I don't know if it was Mark Twain that described it like this, but there was a description of how, like, how presidents and how leaders of countries operate. And they operate if they're on a small boat or a raft going down the river, using a stick to try to guide the raft as different rocks and barriers and fallen trees go into their path, and you try to maneuver around it to keep the raft safe. That is how history operates. A lot of times these wars will happen completely outside the control of me, Zach, Gavin, or even the presidency. You know, it's pretty American-centric view to assume that, like, and I don't think they're assuming this, to assume that, like, a war happened because the Americans wanted the war to happen. Sometimes the war happened because other parties wanted it to happen, where they had different interests. And as the war reared its ugly head, sometimes you don't choose when war happens. A great example would be Neville Chamberlain. He didn't want a war to happen. He did everything he could to try to avoid a war, but we had one anyway.
Zagazoreth has donated $20. Oh look, the America bad argument. Color me surprised.
The thing, thank you for the $20. I appreciate the $20. The thing that gets me is just that we didn't choose this war. In fact, we had been, like, appeasing the Russians in Ukraine for years. We made a commitment that we would help the Ukrainians uphold its territorial integrity. And then when 2014 happened and the Russians invaded, we flat out told the Ukrainians we would not be helping them outside of some limited sanctions, just to show that we were displeased with the Russians. Sanctions that did not really hold up. And then later, like, the most we gave them, I think in 2019, was javelins, which, I mean, I guess that was helpful, but it wasn't a lot. And we continued to appease the Russians with rounds of negotiations, with all sorts of stuff. And so the idea that we just, like, marched headfirst into this war when our government has been trying to avoid this war for quite a while and has been not really helping the Ukrainians out of fear of provoking the Russians. That was the whole logic in the early stages of the war of not sending Abrams, not sending ATACMS, not sending F-16s, not sending this, was that continued mentality of, oh, I don't know, man, should we really, I don't really want to provoke these guys as they invade and conquest and colonize Ukraine. There was other reasons too, like the trickling of aid to make sure that when they cross those barriers, that they do it at a rate that makes it harder for the Russians to escalate in response. But the reason we didn't do it all and front load all that aid and help the Ukrainians quicker, which could have helped them maybe have a more successful counteroffensive in the south if they had the equipment to start it earlier and the Russians didn't have months upon months upon months to build trenches, build defense lines. The reason we didn't do it was out of fear of provoking the Russians.
In the context of Ukraine, through like the veneer of like, oh, we care about this democracy and sovereignty that suspended their fucking elections, right? Like they're like, guys, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of
Okay, to be clear, if this is the standard we're using, the United States was not a democracy during the Civil War. The United States was not a democracy during World War II. I mean, I don't even think the United States would be considered a democracy today based on violating democratic principles like interning Japanese people. Like, for example, Lincoln suspending and cracking down on pro-Confederate press. The UK suspending elections during World War II. This was part of the Ukrainian constitution. This wasn't like Zelensky just came out and said, "Heil the new Zelensky is Krieg, and we're going to suspend the elections to stop the Russians." Like that's not what happened. In fact, Zelensky explicitly told the West, like, look, if you want us to have elections, we have problems with people in occupied territory not being able to vote. We have problems with millions of Ukrainians displaced and be able to get them mail ballots and be able to have them participate. We have problems when it comes to election security. We need to make sure that voting booths are safe, that they have bunkers, that they have locations that they can be safe at, considering Russia's history of targeting civilians. It isn't an anti-democratic principle that caused that. Definitely since, again, Ukraine was invaded in 2014, still had elections in 2019. But the war and the scale of the war is different.
Ukrainian propaganda out there too, and it's to keep us funding that fucking war and to keep lining the fucking weapons manufacturer's pocket. And that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of fucked up shit happening there. I'm telling you.
I just want to throw something out there. Every single war in human history, people have been profiting off of war. There can be people who profit off of war, and the war could still be worth fighting. Ever since man has sharpened rock, man has sold sharpened rock for profit. Like, that isn't saying that that's good. You could say that it's perverse incentive, but to say, oh, our motivation is just to fill the pockets of the weapon defense contractors, I think that's shallow analysis.
Telling you the United States quite simply doesn't give a fuck about the fucked up things. I can tell you about fucked up things everywhere where we don't give a single shit about. We may have fucking started it and be proud of it. Okay, look at our entire history, guys. It's nothing but depravity. You think in this narrow fucking instance, we've decided that it's such an altruistic cause that we have to fucking go out there and rescue Ukraine? No.
Let's say that we are the devil. Joe Biden is actually the devil incarnate, and it's worstly, he's just a horrid person. He just could never do anything right. Everything is for the most perverse incentive. He wants to help Ukraine so he can help his underground Pizzagate sex trafficking ring, for whatever reason it might be, right? The worst of the worst, assuming there's no positive intentions, which I don't agree with. I think there's a multitude of intentions that lead into any war. People like simplistic explanations for war. Why did we start this war? Oil. Why did we start this war? Greed. Why did we start this? But most of the times, there's so many different factions and political pacts and organizations that eventually lead to the motivations of a country to go to war that it's never one reason. It's a multitude of reasons. But let's assume that it's not that complicated. In the video that he didn't watch, I posed this to the Ukrainians. Do you believe the incentives of the United States are pure? And they say, and Thompson said, I think many of their incentives are logical. But Anna said, even if their incentives aren't pure, we don't care. We need the weapons to defend our country. We need the weapons to defend ourselves. At the end of the day, it is useful for them. And so if it is useful for the Ukrainians, it still makes sense for them to want it. It still makes sense for them to favor it, to be in favor of it. And if it leads to a better outcome, it makes sense for me to be in favor of it and for other people to be in favor of it, even if some people are motivated by perverse incentives to be in favor of it. For example, I'm sure when we were sending weapons and trucks and other things to the Soviet Union, there were weapons contractors and there were people who make those trucks, who made that stuff, who had a personal profit incentive to want to send that stuff to the Soviet Union to fight Nazi Germany. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have done it. We're just like, but I'm acknowledging that incentive did exist.
You're the victim of a propaganda effort. Okay, this is just another fucking means of the military industrial.
Okay, I didn't know that. This is a very complicated propaganda effort, this whole country. Very complicated. Kind of just right over my head.
Complex to rein in Russia, keep checks over there, make sure that they know who the big boss is, don't get any fucking ideas, right? It's It's not.
Is that why we're doing it? We're just trying to make sure that we're the big boss. That's the reason why. This is just so shallow analysis. Russia invaded Ukraine. And at every stage before that, we did everything to compromise with them. We did everything to secede to their terms and their conditions. And we did everything to undermine ourselves in supporting Ukraine after making the commitment that we would. And Russia made the commitment that they would in 1994. God, our nation is so snaky. Enter the Iran deal, pull out of the Iran deal. Commit to the Ukrainians, pull out of the Ukrainians. Like, it's just so back and forth, back and forth. Support the SDF, pull out of the SDF. No, support the SDF again, no, pull out of the SDF. God, man. The more we behave like this, the more duplicitous our nation seems.
Not enough to say, oh, what's happening to the Ukrainians is unjust, therefore we have to go in there and like, do something about it. Like, to me, no, I think that continues to kind of feed into this idea that the United States just gets to fly into any country that we want to and do whatever the fuck we want. We don't have a...
That's stupid. It's stupid because there's a difference between the invasion of Iraq or us exceeding our mandate in Libya when it comes to the UN mandate to intervene and stop the bombing and burning down of Benghazi and the killing of the cockroaches, as Gaddafi put it. The difference is we violated their sovereignty. We violated international law. And we exceeded our mandate. In Iraq, we lied in order to invade Iraq, committed the crime of aggression, and then we found that it was all for literally made up nonsense. I do want to remind people that one of the reasons the Russians said they were invading was for weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine too. And I think that might have been slightly cheeky, but the chemical weapons that target Russian DNA. The difference here is our support for Ukraine is completely within international law. We are completely legal to send them weapons in defense of their country. International law is very clear about this, that if one nation state aggresses against another, other nation states can send that nation aid and weapons and whatever is necessary for it to defend itself. The UN is clear about this. International law is clear about this. This is not a question. So saying that, America could go anywhere and do whatever, and that's what this reinforces. No, this is within the bounds of international law. This is within the bounds of global standards that the vast majority of the world has agreed to. So to say that this is like just another example of what we did in Iraq or Libya is just not true, because the standards are different. The conditions are different. What we did in response is different. The legality is different. We are able, as Americans, to make relationship with other countries and make commitments to help them defend themselves if it's in the interest of us in the global community. And I thought, and I would assume these guys do too, I don't know, maybe they're in favor of like more spending of nuclear weapons around the world. I don't know what their favor is. I'm in favor of denuclearization. I think the denuclearization of Ukraine at the time came from good intentions, and it was a good thing to try to make sure that these nation states, as they were breaking off the Soviet Union, didn't just have giant nuclear stockpiles that could either maybe end up on the black market, could maybe not be properly maintained depending on how the budgets of these nations work. Just, it's good for there to be less nuclear weapons in the world and less points of failure. So I do think it was the right thing to do. And I don't think that saying, it's just another example of America saying they can do whatever the fuck they want. That's not true. We're within the bounds of international law that the global community has already agreed to.
Good track record. You can't point to W's, right? If I have to hear one more stupid fucking argument about how we got into World War II as to rescue like Jewish people from the Holocaust, I'm gonna fucking kill myself. That's not what we did.
We don't have any W, like zero W's. Zero. This is zero W's. I had no clue.
We did not do that.
I know we had L's, but I didn't know like the entire existence of America. There's been one fat L.
Don't give us that valor because we don't fucking deserve it. That was not why we got into World War II. We were trying to sell arms to both sides in World War I and in World War II until finally Japan said, no, we're going to take a shot on Hawaii because we want Hawaii. And we said,
that's not true. What is he talking? We were not selling weapons to the Japanese until they attacked Pearl Harbor. That is not true. In fact, part of the reason why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor was because of the oil embargo and the fact that we wouldn't help their war effort by financing it.
Said, sorry guys, it's all over from there. Now we're going to start bombing Japan like crazy because they attacked United States soil, and we have to send a clear message that you can't attack United States soil. And it's true that we had Marines on the ground in Europe before then, guys, but we watched a lot of the worst parts of it go on without getting directly involved. And it wasn't until the fall of fucking France and basically it was going to result in the fall of fucking England, guys. It was you know what I'm saying? We were dragging our feet. The idea that we were doing that as a humanitarian effort was ridiculous.
Here's a question. Should we have intervened in World War II earlier, or is that America making itself too known and like saying it can do whatever it wants? That's a question.
Yeah, I am also interested, Zach, in what you think about the idea that, you know, it's kind of psychopathic to, you know, bring these sorts of YouTube debate bro dramas into the
debate bro dramas. Debate, is that what he just thinks this is? He didn't watch the video. I didn't get there like, isn't Hasan dumb? Isn't Hasan gay? Isn't Hasan stupid? Man, isn't it, man? Aren't I the base guy and Hasan is the dumb guy? The reason I did it is because the most popular political commentator on the entire platform consistently gets basic facts about the war he's commentating on wrong, and the people who are the victims of that war are not very happy about it. And multiple of them had already responded to him. So I was like, well, if multiple of these guys already responded to him, maybe we broaden our reach, include a few other people, a former Hasan fan, somebody who's not seen him before, and we try to get a formal reaction to the types of things that he's saying, which were wrong, which they were happy to do. Like, oh, it's just debate bro drama. No, we didn't focus on drama in the video. We focused on politics. Why is it every single time one political streamer and another political streamer have like a disagreement on politics, it's just, oh, that's drama. And it wasn't even me doing it. It was the Ukrainians disagreeing with him. How is that drama? Is that how it works? If I was to say Gavin is wrong about, I don't know, Medicare for all. I don't know his position on Medicare for all, but I said he was wrong on Medicare for all. Is that drama because we disagreed about politics? Drama would be like, Gavin had sex with my boyfriend. That would be drama. That's drama. This isn't drama. This is a war.
Lives or, you know, interviews of actual like Ukrainian people who are actually potentially suffering or dealing with the sort of war crimes that are going on in their area. Like it kind of reminds me of like, you know, you and I went to go interview some like homeless folks in Kansas City or something, and then we started showing them clips of, you know, different people on YouTube that we have beef with, and they're like, react to this.
Kasparian.
Yeah,
homeless man just destroys. And imagine if we started making content.
It would be so
like
cringy. I can't imagine. Like,
man, because that'd be different if I walked up to a random person on the street and said, want to react to this video? Which is not what I did at all. Multiple of them had already responded to Hasan. One of them had already brought up Hasan directly to me in question. That would be like if I was walking down the street and a homeless person was like, I think Anna Kasparian's stupid. And I was like, Anna Kasparian? You watch Anna Kasparian? Yeah, I think she's wrong about this. Here's a video I released on my channel about why Anna Kasparian's stupid. Man, I don't know how you have a YouTube channel as a homeless person. That's pretty cool. Do you want to talk about it on my show? I can give you a platform if you wanted to voice your opinions. That would be, I guess, the comparison.
Like talking to someone who's dealing with so much more serious things going on in their life and just being like, hey bro, react to my adversary on YouTube saying something that
adversary. Everybody on this on online political Twitch views it all just like my adversary. Is that how I view people? Like, is Jackson Hinkle my adversary? Is Hasan my adversary, my opponent? This isn't like Pokemon. This isn't like Beyblade or something. This, it's politics. What was that thing that Thorfinn said? I have no enemies.
I disagree with, and I bet you do too, right? Right? Like, it just, it is a kind of a weird.
That's not what I did. You didn't watch the fucking video. Gavin, this is, I don't want to assume bad faith, but I do assume laziness.
Thing to me, I don't disagree with the underlying logic that, like, yeah, those people that are directly impacted by the war should be included in the conversations about the conflicts. Obviously that makes sense.
It's just bad when, you know, those people critique the streamers I like.
But I do think it's kind of just a glorified way of showing like some, you know, person in a war, like a war-torn conflict of YouTube video and being like, dunk on my adversary.
War tourism. There it is.
For me, for clicks. Like, it's a little bit weird.
He didn't watch it. He has no clue what the tone of the video even is. His judgment on this is completely worthless.
Yeah, man, you're facing 5 for possession, but will you condemn Matt Walsh? He actually says that you should be put to death right now. Like, that's fucking crazy, right? Do you want to leave a message for him? You know, also, would you mention to subscribe to?
I didn't jump these people. I didn't like force them to do it. They have autonomy. These are human beings. I didn't go to like the Ukrainian Mental Health Institute and find like the most schizophrenic or like people who had no ability to consent whatsoever and like Hasan, bad, and I like beat him with a stick a few times. That's Hasan. And then I show a picture of me and I give them candy. That's Dylan. Hasan. Dylan. Hasan. And I like I'm like Pavlov with the dogs. It didn't happen.
The Vanguard podcast. Yeah, it kind of gives that energy. But it is through the lens of like, oh wow, I'm like the most pro like Ukraine. I'm like Galaxy Brain, bro. Like these are real Ukrainians that are telling you that you should subscribe to my show and not Hasan's. Like, it's a tone of the video? I didn't know that, man. I do kind of think it comes across that way. Whether or not that's how Dylan intended it.
You know what's crazy is they have a tweet on screen right now that says Hasan did not take my interview well. Said it's psychopathic to interview Ukrainians about what they think of his statements, threw insults, and said he was clipped out of context. No way he watched the interview.
Fake Alec Kyle Parker has donated $10. In an alternate world, you're their professor and you're giving them an F for doing a presentation on a book they didn't read.
That is true. That is very true. I watched Moby Dick. I really thought it was inappropriate. I didn't think that we should be prescribed such a sexual book. That's what it feels like right now. But I say in here, my critique of Hasan, no way he watched the interview. And you can see that I'm not very happy with the fact that Hasan didn't watch the interview. And they just did the same thing. They can see that I say, he said I was clipped out of context. Why? Man.
I think it's fucking crazy. He's like, you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Like, bro, what are you trying to accomplish here? Like,
the goal is, well, if you want to know my goals, I have a few goals. Number one, include Ukrainians more in the conversations in alt media spaces. Number two, make sure that when dumb shit is said about Ukraine that is uninformed, especially when it's very popular and influential people saying it, that there's something there to check it, something there to critique it, especially if the person in question said that they like critique.
What is
like if I did this with Tucker, this would not be a problem. Gavin, Zach, Hasan, nobody would even talk about it. They'd be like, oh, really? Oh wow, look at those Ukrainians telling Tucker he's stupid. Woo, yeah, Tucker is stupid. Yeah, woo. It'd be totally different. It'd be at 180 immediately.
Your goal other than that you want the United States to fund more war? Like, do you not understand that?
Wow, man. That's really deep.
Our position and the position of Hasan is less war, not war more. Like, find a position.
Wow, man. You know, you don't like war, but I like the war. And if we were just to stop sending weapons to Ukraine, the war in the world would decrease.
Of mine, where it's like, yeah, the United States military. You can't find it because I will not do that. I don't care what you try and do to get me to support the United States military going in and doing.
Okay, I'm going to speed through the last bit of this because I've been watching this for too long and I've learned nothing because I didn't watch the video. So I'm just going to speed through it.
But I can promise you, I do not support it. I don't fucking support it because I don't trust those fuckers. They never do anything out of the fucking goodness of their hearts. And that's what I want to get across to everybody, right? There is no, like, greater good that they're pursuing other than the bottom line for the fucking capitalist class. Like that is what it is, guys. And people can say that and they'll be like, oh, I'm a Marxist. Okay, well, clearly you're not practicing that right now because you believe that for some ridiculous reason, the United States government had a Grinch moment and its heart grew 30 sizes that day. And fucking,
it really is just America bad, isn't it? Is he gonna say anything else?
Yeah, we're out here. We really care about liberating this like one sovereign group of people. And I'll say what, it helps that they're white folks to sell that to people. That's why you got every liberal from coast to coast hanging Ukrainian flag outside, because when they're brown people just go like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm really like, I totally care about that, but I'm just not very well informed. That's what they, I'm sorry, I just haven't seen that. I'm not very well informed. That's what happens when they're dark skinned folks. But when they're white, have you seen the Russian war? Everybody knows about it, right? That's what's going on right now. So at least they have that in their corner, right? Because the people of Yemen, they didn't get that benefit of the doubt, and neither of the people of Palestine. Remember when you were talking about how they elected Hamas fucking over a decade ago? Fucking couldn't they just have doing something besides all that terrorism and throat slitting, right? Why couldn't they just drop drone strikes on innocent people like civilized folks, like the United States government, right? Like,
what the fuck? Who is he talking to? Is that supposed to be in reference to me? I want the occupation of Palestine to end. I have no. I think it is definitely within the laws of war for them to fight Israeli soldiers and tanks. If the Ukrainian government was to send troops across the border and just randomly mow down Russian civilians, go in their home and shoot babies in the crib, fucking start slitting the throats of like random babushka grandmas, I believe that would deserve critique too. And my critique would be, we give you all this support, all this help, all this stuff, and what do you use it for? You use to go across the border and slaughter people. How dare, after taking advantage of the, that would be the responsible, correct reaction. You could have done all these things to benefit Ukraine, and instead you use your resources to engage in that type of an act. Thankfully, the Ukrainian government has yet to do something like that.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Or the IDF, which apparently gets a pass for all the war crimes they commit against civilians constantly.
Who is he talking? Are they talking about me? Are they just talking about liberals in general? I have no clue who they're referencing.
White phosphorus, fucking bombing hospitals, bombing children's schools, UN children's schools, by the way.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, guys. Like, I get that the Palestinian government, Hamas, whatever, like, I get that it's not as trustworthy or easy to negotiate with or work with as other governments like the Ukrainian government. I understand that it's not like a traditional government in that sense, but it is weird. I do find it weird that some of the folks that were just decided to make their entire political ideology about making the case for America funding the conflict in Ukraine and bankrolling the Ukrainian defense.
I'm a journalist. I'm a war journalist. I covered the war. And then people, obviously, when they talk to me and being surrounded by the war, my life is dominated by it, dominated by the suffering, dominated by the death, dominated by the death pits, dominated by the war crimes, dominated by the sirens, dominated by the bunkers, dominated by the shelling, dominated by the bombings, dominated by all of that. So obviously, if your life is dominated by that 7 months out of the year, that's how much time I spend in Ukraine, 7 months out of the year, then I'm going to want to talk about it. And it's going to be the most present thing in my mind. My life is dominated by the war, so I talk about the war. I want to record the war and document it. Like, I've talked about other political topics. If you check out my second channel, like, you can see all these different political topics I've talked about. You could look at my history involved in political activism if people really want to. It's not the only thing I care about, but if I'm covering a war, I'm going to talk a lot about the war, and I'm going to care about that war.
It seems like those people have nothing to say or very little to say about how, maybe the U.S. should be helping the Palestinian people. Why aren't we applying that same logic over there? And again, I understand that a lot.
I said that, but whatever. He's just like arguing against like the vague liberal cloud at this point.
A lot of people, because of Hamas, they don't want to funnel any money into that government. They think it's just going to go towards more terrorism instead of aid.
I think we should move aid in there. I don't think we should send Hamas rockets because of their record of how they use the rockets and immediately what they use them for. But I do think we should send the Gaza Strip aid, as we have before.
Or what it's actually supposed to go to. But a lot of the same arguments have been made about the Ukrainian government as well, and how corrupt it is, and how
it's not even comparable. Hamas corruption and Ukrainian corruption, it's not even comparable. Not only is it not comparable, their ideologies are not comparable. What they do with the weapons and what they would do if we sent Hamas weapons is not comparable. Considering that like Hamas like deliberately went out and just targeted the civilians with no regard. Like, they could have just concentrated on killing soldiers on October 7th. And they did kill some soldiers. But the majority of the people they killed were civilians. And they didn't kill them with like shelling. They killed them with small arms fire. So it's not like it was like, oh, collateral damage. I just kind of missed here with the artillery shell. It was, there's a civilian. Boom, boom, boom. There's a civilian. Boom, boom, boom. I don't think these two things are comparable.
A lot of the money and arms that we're providing that government are not going where they're supposed to be going either, and how a lot of people are just getting really fucking rich.
That's not true. I'd like to hear Gavin tell me which arms we've sent to Ukraine have not gone to the war effort. I would like to hear Gavin say that, because there's no evidence of that so far. There's questions about humanitarian aid being resold, which is also the same problem in the Gaza Strip, but I doubt Gavin would say, hey, don't send aid to the Gaza Strip, because a lot of that aid is being resold, or a lot of that aid is then being diverted for weapons. But when it comes to military weapons that we've sent over to the Ukrainians, we have an inspector general overseeing the process. Like, we have like full, if you compare like the lists we released to explain what we've sent to Ukrainians to the Israelis, like the Ukrainian list is like 10 pages long, and it describes in detail the exact amount of what and this and that and what we gave here and that. And you look at the Israeli list, it'll just say like bombs. It's like the least amount of transparency you could expect.
Off this continued conflict.
Straight out of the Kremlin. He's reading his lines. I can see it.
I mean, he did just lie and say that the weapons we're sending over there is really going into the pockets of the government officials. That didn't happen. We don't have any evidence of it. If he does have any evidence of it, I would love to hear it.
But you know what I'm saying, Zach? Like, is it not weird to you that there's not more of a push from those folks to help Palestine? If you care so much about, people's right to defend against an invading force, if you care so much about sovereignty of nation, it's like, wouldn't this kind of be your conflict too?
Hamas has a right to fight Israeli soldiers and like tankers if they want to. Like any type of resistance group has a right to, especially if there's an occupation going on. But Hamas spent its time, its big moment where it finally crossed the board and had a moment to like, let's fight these. It spent its whole time just basically mowing down the vast majority civilians.
Why aren't you into this one?
So I would say that there's a difference between, because when the Ukrainian government infiltrated and they took, I will say for the Russian Volunteer Corps, these are like some of the worst, in my opinion, some of the worst scum when it comes politically, when it comes to the Ukrainian military. Like the farthest of the far right you could find the Ukrainian military. They send them over the border. Where were the executions of civilians? Where was what we saw in southern Israel that is comparable? There isn't anything comparable.
Well, there's that old Family Guy meme that I think does a lot of justice. I'm gonna throw it up for you all because I just can't help but think it applies so much. I'm stalling here because I didn't think I would have to use this.
I know which one you mean.
Oh, I've got
white people.
Gavin knows what I mean, but
white people. Am I right? White people. White people.
Right here, guys. This
white
is everything
people.
That why are you so wrapped up in the Ukrainian cause?
White people.
Palestinian cause,
White people.
And
Am I
also,
right?
guys, by the way, I have
white people.
Never called for the United States to give money and have the United States invade Israel on behalf of the Palestinians. I have never, ever called for that. I've called for humanitarian aid to be delivered to the Palestinian people. Just like I said, Gavin and I both said this months and months ago. We want all of the blankets and fucking food.
Is there any group or organization that should be sent weapons? Is there any time like where like violence is like an acceptable response? Where the world could get together and be like, yeah, actually, I think that this is not acceptable and we need to help them fight back. Is there any example of this? Because I assume they would say it was fine with helping the Soviets, right? So where is the line? Like I just
on fucking artillery and drones and all that shit. Yes, that's a humanitarian effort. I believe in that. The United States can 100% do that without trying to be a fucking instigator and deep in a conflict, right?
Instigator. We instigated the war in Ukraine.
I call for the same thing in Palestine, right? I'm consistent here. I'm not calling for us to send a bunch of weapons to the people in Gaza and make this a fucking bloodier catastrophe than it already will be, right? I want to call for diplomacy and ceasefire again. So anyway,
yeah.
Wow, that was a waste of my time. Man, I lost a lot of respect for them. They didn't even watch it, and they said it was out of context. Yeah, that's really as I'll use his words. Very Weasley behavior.